You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and it's Wednesday afternoon going into Wednesday evening, which means it's time to look ahead to another week of NFL action. This time, we cross over into the double digits of the season as Week 10 is officially upon us. We are more now than halfway through the season. So, we're looking at Thursday Night Football today. Make sure you're subscribed because we'll be talking all of Sunday's games on Fridays and, of course, Monday night's games on Sunday. So make sure you do not miss out. But we're focusing on Thursday Night Football action between the Broncos and Raiders. So I invite you all to comment down below. As always, fire away. Let me hear from you. Your thoughts, your opinions on the matchup, who's coming out on top and why. And as a reminder, no betting advice here. We're here for a good time to talk some football and break it all down, and I hope you all want to join in and do the same. So, looking at this game here, Las Vegas coming into Denver, the Broncos currently 4-0 at home this season, being able to pull off win after win after win in big fashion at home. On top of that, going up against a Las Vegas Raiders team currently sitting at 1-3 on the road, and they're coming off of a failed 2-point conversion overtime loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars last week with a pass from Geno Smith getting batted down at the line of scrimmage, and one of the more just like awkward endings to a game, despite the fact that we got like that, even though that game ended with a successful win and somebody coming out on top, the ending felt almost just as awkward with that pass getting batted down at the line of scrimmage as like the Packers and Cowboys tie from earlier this season in overtime. It was a very weird ending where it felt like even the commentary team was a little surprised the ball just kind of got batted down, and that's how things were decided as they went for two. But going into this game here, I think it's a little bit of a matchup nightmare for Geno Smith. It has been a wild season for him with some really high highs and some really low lows depending on where you look at throughout the season. And even without Patrick Surtain in the fold right now, I think Denver's defense, from the very front level at the defensive line all the way to the back end when you look at the safety tandem they have there led by Brandon Jones and Talanoa Hufanga right now, this is a bit of a nightmare for him. For somebody who has nearly as many interceptions as he does touchdowns, I know he's coming off of a really strong contest against Jacksonville last week where he went for 4 touchdowns with a singular interception, nearly 300 yards, completed well above 70% of his passes. That Jacksonville defense by no means is very good at stopping teams from throwing the football. Now, the Denver Broncos, on the flip side, they are a stout defense and very good at stopping teams from throwing the football, and it looks like even without Patrick Surtain in the fold, as things looked pretty solid last week against Houston, even prior to CJ Stroud going down with his concussion. But I mean, you look at Denver right now, the pass rush alone on a historic run led by Nik Bonitto, who has 8 sacks on the season so far alone, the team as a total sitting at 40. They are currently on pace to break the team sack record by season's end right now. They've still got plenty of time to do so, and they're sitting at 40 sacks. And to give you an idea of how far ahead this pass rush is to everyone else, the team in second place behind them is sitting at 28. So no one else has even crossed 30 sacks this season, and Denver's already sitting at 40. They're first in sack rate as the only team currently in double digits right now, and they're in the 11% number. I think it's like 11.3 is the exact number. They're first in pressure rate. They're at the top of the list in pressures as well. You name it. Denver Broncos defense and their pass rush specifically can get the job done no matter who it is that they're going up against. You couple that with the fact that, again, this team also loves to blitz. They love to get creative with what they're doing. They're third in the NFL right now in terms of overall blitz rate. They don't let teams score through the air. They don't let teams move very often throwing the football as well. They're 6th in passing yards. This could be a really tough outing for Geno Smith. I know that last week was a bit of a bounce back. It's the best that Geno Smith has looked in some time, in like nearly a month at this point, but I'm curious to see whether that was a bit of a facade just because Jacksonville is so poor at defending the pass this season, and as they have been for the last couple of years now as a whole. That being said, there is something that could maybe be a big reason as to why we saw an uptick in Geno Smith's performance last week, and it might have to do with the return of Brock Bowers, who I think could pose a bit of an issue for this Denver Broncos defense, because everyone is well aware at this point now, when Brock Bowers is healthy, he is a matchup nightmare on that football field because, is your corner big enough to defend him? Or are they too small? Are your linebackers fast enough to defend him? Are they too slow? Your safety, is he good enough in coverage just overall to be able to man up and deal with a Brock Bowers who, at the freak size and speed and just overall athleticism that guy is built with, he's a matchup nightmare. And last week in his return game, after missing about a month of football action, 12 receptions, 137 yards in 3 receiving touchdowns of the 4 passing touchdowns that Geno Smith threw, it's almost like no surprise as to why Geno Smith maybe had himself a hell of a bounce back game against that Jacksonville Jaguars defense. Now, Denver right now, currently as it ranks, if you want to get into some real nitty gritty numbers, they're about in the middle of the NFL in terms of receiving yards allowed to tight ends, sitting at about 54 yards per game. They're actually like smack in the middle at 16th, so right in the league average. That being said, when you look at the defensive construction of the Denver Broncos and just kind of looking at all the different guys, the various positions that you could potentially find matching up with him, I'm really curious to seeing how they deploy things and who they deploy in the area of Brock Bowers play by play as we go through. Because like you look at the linebacking room and the guys that they have there, Dre Greenlaw returning a few weeks ago, played in week 7, missed week 8, came back into the fold last week against the Houston Texans. Obviously, very curious to see how he fares matching up with him in different coverage situations. Then, of course, you have Chris Abrams-Drain, who's obviously supplementing for the hurt Patrick Surtain right now. Riley Moss is in the fold as well. Those guys, obviously, not exactly your biggest corners in the NFL. Both those guys sitting at like right around 6 feet or a little bit smaller, so not the biggest guys in the room by any means. And then you have your safeties in Brandon Jones and Talanoa Hufanga and what they're able to do. I'll be curious to see who that guy is that has to step up, and ultimately if Denver's able to slow him down, because he's a big reason as to why this Raiders offense has found passing success when he's healthy and on the football field. Like you go all the way back to like week number 1 when the Raiders were playing the New England Patriots. A big reason why the Raiders were ultimately able to win that football game prior to Brock Bowers going down with injury was because he was catching everything and making monster play after monster play against that secondary that wasn't quite where it is to this point in New England now, prior to Christian Gonzalez coming back from his hamstring injury he was dealing with. So very interesting situation overall with his return and just how dominant he looked and how massive of a turnaround it ultimately resulted in their quarterback Geno Smith having coming into that game here. And also the other effect of that, and you could spin off into this too, is just like how much does this help out the run game as well? Because now defenses who maybe have been keying in on Ashton Genty a little bit more, Jacoby Myers is also not in the fold anymore on top of the Raiders. We didn't even get into that yet. So there's a lot of interesting things that could shake out now with Brock Bowers being a bigger focal point in the passing attack. Jacoby Myers is gone now. Do teams have to respect Brock Bowers more? Does that open things up for Ashton Genty and the Denver Broncos, who are a hell of a run defense on top of that? Very interesting offensive to defensive matchup between Denver's defense and how they're going to have to handle the Las Vegas Raiders offense. On the flip side, looking at Denver's offense, this is more of like a 1,000-yard view question. It's not super in-depth, but I do think it's a fair question to ask because of what we've seen from Denver this year, is just what version of the Denver Broncos offense do we get? Because it has been, like I said with Geno Smith, you can kind of say the same thing about the Broncos offense as a whole. There's been some really high highs and some fairly low lows, but they're still winning football games despite that. We've seen Denver win putting up as much as 44 points in a game, 33 points in a singular quarter. We've also seen them win games scoring just 13 points on the back of their defense, holding their opponent down to just 11 in the New York Jets a few weeks back overseas. So, and you look at this recently as last week. 18-point win, defense held on strong. You ultimately score yourself some game-winning points very late in the fourth quarter to come away with the W. When you look at the Raiders' defense and just overall how they've played so far this season, has not been exactly the most stout unit in the NFL. 26 points per game allowed. They're bottom third in pass defense, pass rush. They're about league average in rush defense as well, sitting at around like 110 yards or so per game allowed on the ground. This could be a good opportunity for the Broncos to find a little bit more momentum as they continue to work through this massive winning streak that they're on right now and continue to try to take a stranglehold of the AFC West the way they're already kind of working on. So very interested in seeing, because it's just been a wild, you never really know what you're going to get from this Broncos offense. It's a very hard unit to figure out because some weeks they look great and then other weeks they just do not, and then maybe find a way to do it late in the game. So very interesting offense to follow this season, and I'm excited to see what Denver does against a down and out division rival like the Las Vegas Raiders in some primetime football on Thursday night, which also can always lead to some like wonkier offensive productions because it's a short week. That all being said, as for who I think is going to come out winning in this matchup here, I would love to give the Raiders a chance, but I'm definitely leaning with the Broncos on this one here. From the way the Broncos defense has looked season-wide, from the start of the year to this point in the season now, they have been a dominant unit up front. I could see that pass rush being a bit of a nightmare for Geno Smith to handle. We didn't even get into it, but the numbers that he has when facing pressure is not exactly the prettiest by any means. He actually is sitting on 4 interceptions when facing pressure so far this season, which ties him for amongst the most in the NFL. It's not the most, but it's like the second most or third most, if I'm remembering correctly. But he's sitting on 4 picks when the pressure's on, and something tells me that this Denver Broncos defense might be able to generate just a little bit of pressure against that O-line over there in Las Vegas. So I would love to give the Raiders a better chance, but I'm leaning very heavy Denver Broncos on this one here. They're also just rocking and rolling right now with a ton of momentum. The only thing that stops Denver in this game is if the offense just completely falls flat on their face. But even then, in Denver, it's very hard for me to go against the Broncos in this one. So I'll take the Broncos 24-13. I think the defense suffocates Las Vegas, even with Brock Bowers in fold. Like, I think that's where that touchdown's coming from. You maybe get yourself a Brock Bowers touchdown. You see a handful of field goals coming away because the Raiders just ultimately are not able to get too deep into enemy territory. They don't get to capitalize, and you get yourself like a 24-13 Denver Broncos comfortable win. You could maybe see a few more points than that, but on a Thursday night short week, coming off of a really tough defensive battle against the Texans last week, I could see the Broncos sitting somewhere in like the mid to like maybe slightly high 20s. So we're talking like 26, 27 points if things really go their way in this one. But those are my thoughts and opinions on the Thursday night matchup. As always, comment down below. Let me hear from you. Thoughts, opinions, who you like and dislike and why. And as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I will see you all on Friday to break down every single game we will see on Sunday. And of course, we will break down Monday's action on Sunday. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. Have a good one.